Hey, hey, hey. Welcome, folks. I am Bob Plankers. I'm a senior technical marketing architect at VMware Corporation, and welcome to the live stream. This is the third one we've done, and I'm looking forward to it. We're going to talk today about ways to make compliance audits better. I know we all love compliance audits, and by love I mean hate. How do we get into the situation where we've got compliance audits? And the truth is the auditors don't like us very much either. Us vSphere admins, we're grumpy. We don't like having our work checked. Didn't we do this already? Yeah. So yeah, we can talk about it. I see a number of you out there. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we can do to make these audits better, what we can do to make them faster, I won't say enjoy. I almost said enjoy, but I'll stop there. Let's be careful about how far we're going to go here. Like I said, I'm Bob Plankers. I work on vSphere topics. vSphere is vSphere security, vSphere compliance, that sort of thing. And so here, let me get my let me get my stream going here, and there we go. And yeah, so let's get a move on. My plan here is to talk for about 20-30 minutes about the vSphere compliance. If you've got questions, comments, thoughts, put them out in the chat, and I'll answer them live, or I'll answer them at the end as well. We can talk about a bunch of that stuff. Whatever questions you've got, let's have them. Like I said, this is the third one that we've done, third week. It is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month here in the USA. But vSphere is a global thing. VMware is a global thing. We've got employees all over the world. We've got customers all over the world. And, we've got attackers all over the world, too. The bad actors of the world are not confined to the country that you live in. They come from all over. They are all races, shapes, sizes, creeds, all of that stuff. And so, yeah, I've just trimmed off the national part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and trying to keep our topics more global in nature. Compliance is often a U.S.-based thing with NIST, HIPAA, and all of that, but in the European standards as well, and other country standards that we're getting into. But yeah, so let's talk. This is the URL for the web page with all of the links on it. The recordings, the other two recordings, 5 Steps to Hardening vSphere Security, was popular. I walked through a number of tools. Ways to protect applications, and now we're on compliance. Next week we'll talk about identity management and keeping attackers out. Basically, how do we keep attackers out? What are some good strategies for that? So, like I said, identity management and things like that. If you've heard me talk before, I apologize. I'm joking. I'm not joking. Thanks for the repeat business. I really appreciate it. You've probably heard me go over the CIA triad, and I'm going to do that again. Compliance, really, the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. They're the core tenets of information security, and the compliance frameworks are aligned directly in these columns. They may not say that these 3 pillars are the 3 pillars for the compliance framework, but they are. And confidentiality, what we think about as security, nerd knobs, making control changes, that sort of thing, keeping bad actors away from our data. That's what we think of security, and it's really just about a third of it. Integrity is really important. Ransomware plays into the integrity side of things, really big time there. That doesn't make any sense. Gooder English today, Bob. Integrity is very important. If I leave data there, if I leave a system, I expect to come back and find it the way I expect it. So, and then availability. Oh, the availability always gets a short end of the stick. Because it costs money. Do we really need that extra domain controller? Because I don't want to pay for the license. Yeah, you do. We need to be able to patch that stuff. Do we really need an extra power supply? Yeah, you do. And it's stuff like that. And availability leads to patching. Patching leads to not getting hacked. Yeah, it's nice. The other thing that I really want to cover up front here too is, and I've been saying this a lot lately, is that security is not really a contest. It's not a race. I love this stock photo. I found this in the Adobe stock photo library. The movie Spinal Tap, if you've seen it, the idea of our amps go to 11. there's a lot of people that want to set their security up to go to 11, and it's always a trade-off. Security is always trading something off. Usability, usually, staff time, cost, will to live, things like that. And anytime you're adding a control, anytime you're doing something, you should be asking yourself, what is the opportunity cost here? What else could I be doing to move the business forward? Because frankly, I'm honest about it. And that's one thing. I'll be completely honest about security, that everything we do in security is overhead. It's not going to move your organization forward. It's not going to it may keep your organization from moving backwards really quickly, but it's not going to move your organization forward like other efforts will. And so, so finding a balance there, really important. We'll talk about that. I'm actually getting ahead of myself here, and the next thing that I always think, I sit and I think, how did I get into this position? How did we get here? As vSphere admins that are worried about compliance, how did we end up doing on a live stream talking about this sort of stuff? Don't we have better places to be? And I think about my past, where I was just maybe a former version of myself, junior sysadmin Bob. He was kind of a doofus, and working on a bunch of stuff, and my boss comes to me or comes to junior Bob and says, hey, I need you to work on this compliance audit. We're being audited. I'm putting you on the project. And I'm like, what do I know about security? I'm not a security folks. What are the InfoSec people doing? And not realizing at the time, junior sysadmin Bob, not realizing that security is everyone's problem. In fact, the actual implementation of security, what is InfoSec off doing? InfoSec is off doing incident response. They're threat hunting, trying to find whoever just installed malware accidentally on their PC and a budding ransomware infection. They're off worrying about that. They're setting policy. The CISO's a policy position, honestly, and they're an audit position, checking to make sure that us vSphere admins complied with the policy. That's what they're busy doing. And so who gets the rest of the work that needs to be done? vSphere admins, sysadmins, that sort of thing, app admins. And so security is everyone's problem. But junior admin Bob doesn't realize that. And so, and then my boss says, hey, I'm not really asking. Something that I tell my 5-year-old all the time, my 5 and 8-year-olds. I wasn't really asking. It sounded like a question, not really asking. And so I'm stuck, right? So you go to the meeting, you go to the kickoff meeting. There's some dude there with a compliance scanner output page, and it's got a ton of red stuff on it. And you look at it and, why am I here and that? And that's really the first thing that I want to talk about is understanding why we're doing this. Why do businesses subject their staff to this level of torture? Both the auditors being tortured by the vSphere admins and the vSphere admins being tortured by the auditors. Why? Aren't we secure? Why can't we all just, get on with our lives? And part of it is there's basically 3 things. One, compliance efforts really help a business balance the needs for security versus their own business needs. And we just talked about that security is always a trade-off. And where do you start? Where's the right amount? Too little is clearly wrong. Like we always think about too little security. We get hacked, breaches, end up on the front page of the newspaper, our stock drops to 0, class action lawsuits. That's not cool. But too much security as well is bad because of that opportunity cost. We're spending money on something that maybe we didn't need to spend money on or spend time on, that sort of stuff. We're adding friction to our lives. The other thing, proving that our businesses are adhering to a set of requirements. We want to take credit cards? Sure. We want to serve healthcare, serve patients or whatever. We want to we want to operate a nuclear power plant. We need to adhere to the regulations for that. And they're normalized across the industry, try to set a level playing field. And so the prize for that, and so a third-party auditor comes in. Those third-party auditors do something known as attestation. And this is probably a term you've heard me say in the past and other stuff with vSphere. Attesting is just having a third-party check to make sure that you're doing it right and then signing off on it. vSphere, vCenter Server attests if you're using Secure Boot and things like that. vSphere Server attests the ESXi hosts if you've got Secure Boot and TPMs installed, things like that. And so you might see that there. Well, third-party auditors attest our stuff as well. The prize for that is we gain the ability to operate. And, part of what I wanted to do here is also introduce some terminology too. This authority to operate, ATO. We get a letter saying that we can collect credit cards, and we can take credit cards to in our organization, in our business. And really this all sums up to getting paid. Our orgs want to continue getting paid. We're not doing this stuff for free, right? We're not doing I would do something different with my life than a compliance audit if I wasn't getting paid for it, that sort of thing. And so the getting paid, continue on, it is a business. And so that's important. It's all about risk. It's all about risk to that stream, and you can say what you want about capitalism, whatever, that's the fundamental thing. The business wants to continue. And so this is part of doing business in those regulated industries. One thing I want to talk about, another question around why that we get a lot is, why can't VMware just supply a certificate? Why can't we can't just put a PDF of a certificate up on our website saying that vSphere is secure? And well, we do feel that it's very secure. It's a component in a lot of different secure environments. But I often liken it to building supplies. Building inspector is an auditor of sorts. And UL, Underwriters Laboratories, they certify that certain components meet certain safety guidelines. It's similar to how we validate. Well, and the good term for it is validation. UL validated. We do things like FIPS validation. We validate our software, vSphere, against FIPS itself, ESXi against FIPS, and that it meets FIPS 140-2, the rules there, the requirements there. And so that makes it FIPS validated. But like an electrical switch, a building inspector will not sign off on a building inspection just by looking at a pile of wires and cabling and switches in my garage floor. The building inspector wants to see it implemented, and that's what compliance is focused on. An audit is against a particular implementation. So to declare something compliant, it's that implementation. And the auditors are making sure that, building inspectors, making sure that even though I've got UL listed parts, UL validated parts, I could still wire it up to cause a fire. I could still wire it up incorrectly, cause short circuits and blow breakers and things. And it's the same in the software world. And so that's why there's not attestation. That's not why there's not certification against the products. It's against the implementation itself. So that's an important distinction. Number 2 point, I'm talking a lot about people, process, and things. This is more of a process thing. It's more of a people thing. But some points around people. Looking forward, not backwards. There's a real tendency on human beings, and I get caught, like if you're watching this and you know me, you'd probably say, Bob, you do this all the time. And I do, and that's why I recognize it. Honestly, that's why I recognize it. As humans, we want to blame stuff. We want to assign blame. Why did we get here? How did we get to this point? And for compliance stuff, for compliance audits, don't worry about it. One, you're all on the same team. Try to avoid blaming each other. Whatever happened, and it just is what it is. There's differing motivations and pressures. By the way, the skull I love it. It's our official VMware ransomware icon. Cool, I guess, the differing motivations and pressures. The last time you did an audit, maybe it was a few years ago, you didn't have ransomware to worry about. Now it's the boogeyman. It's a wonderful boogeyman. If you want to justify pretty much anything, you can find a ransomware way to do it. But differing motivations and pressures. That also, organizations change, compliance standards change. They do, and that's guidance changes over time. The guidance that we have for these compliance efforts does change over time, and we have to adapt to it. And really, a big point I want to make here, and I'm going to reiterate this a few times throughout the talk, is only vSphere admins really know vSphere. InfoSec people don't really know vSphere. Your manager doesn't really know vSphere. The CIO doesn't really know vSphere. The auditor doesn't know vSphere. And they might know some things based on their history and that, but it's not only vSphere admins really know vSphere. So we need to be cognizant of that. And vSphere admins need to realize that we need to educate these other folks. They may be making some assumptions about vSphere that might not be true. They may be making some assumptions about old versions of vSphere that aren't true with vSphere 6.7 and 7, that sort of thing. And so, just something to keep in mind. And keeping these things in mind helps ease this, especially we're all on the same team. We all want this audit to happen. We want it to contribute to security. If there are improvements to be made, we should make them. If there aren't improvements to be made, it's nice to have somebody check our work, right? And say that we've done a good job. 3, know that there are very different forms of guidance available. First, the guidance, the actual compliance frameworks are, this is NIST 800-53 version 5. Version 5 is brand new. It got released a couple weeks ago. And as such, nobody has implemented it. We're looking at it right now ourselves and seeing what needs to happen. There are some changes there. PCI 321, that's been around for a while. In fact, May 2018. It says, the nice thing, these things are cool. They cover a lot of different things. They cover a lot of process. They're very wordy. The 800-53 is many hundreds of pages long if you print it out. And it's that one's organized into low, moderate, and high levels too. So you can kind of choose your own adventure there. And that's really nice. One thing that isn't really nice about these things is they tell you what you need to achieve. You need to implement two-factor authentication, for example. But they don't tell you how. They don't tell you exactly how. They don't tell you what controls in vSphere to change. They don't tell you any of that sort of stuff. For that, we have implementation guides. This is a security configuration guide, version 7. Got released a couple weeks ago with vSphere 7 Update 1. And this is the page of the virtual machine settings. And these virtual machine settings, these are the sort of nerd knobs, but these sorts of things, and there's lots of examples of this. DISA STIGs, STIG, a Security Technical Implementation Guide, CIS benchmarks, all that stuff. It's somebody's opinion of how to secure your environment. And that somebody, we don't know the provenance of that. Well, this one we do. It's me right now, and history, Mike Foley, and a lot of VMware folks. But, these implementation guides don't tell you why they're suggesting things. They just tell you what to do and how to do it. And so they... that's a real real distinction. There's a real gap between these two sets of tools then, and so how it's a vSphere admin. Because vSphere admins are the only folks that know vSphere. We're the ones that have to mate these two to an actual implementation, and so it's quite tricky because, again, implementation guides are very handy, but they don't necessarily map back and forth. So this is all a bunch of lead up. VMware actually has compliance kits. The what we call a compliance kit that tries to do both. Tries to produce advice about how to meet these controls, and like in this case, PCI DSS, NIST 800-53, and it comes with two things. There's stuff for the auditors, and there's a product applicability guide, which is like the security configuration guide. It has got specific advice for meeting specific controls. These are really cool. We've got a bunch of them now, and we're doing more of them, and we're updating a bunch of these as well. They apply to the VMware validated designs, our reference architectures. In the past, in the future, there'll be VCF and things. We're looking at doing one for the for vSphere directly and replacing the security configuration guide. But these are also attested by a third-party auditor. So a third-party auditor has taken it, gone through everything, and said, "Hey, this is right," and they give their seal of approval. And so that's actually really cool, and that's a powerful thing to give to an auditor in an organization. And so. Where can you get these? Core.vmware.com. This summer, vSphere, vSAN, and VCF folks, all the technical marketing folks merged, and we're trying to merge all of our content. Core.vmware.com is where that's at. And I created a compliance section. There's a security section too, so check back. It's very much a work in progress at the moment, but yeah. Number 4, read the regulations yourself. So I just got done talking about the regulations. Read what they're after, because that implementation guide, you need to be able to sort out opinion from requirement. And the requirements, in a compliance audit, the requirements are in the compliance framework. They're not. One thing I didn't mention is that implementation guides also come in the form of tools, scanners. A tool that says that it's got a PCI compliance check, that's an implementation guide. It's somebody's opinion about it, and it might not match nicely to your environment. The nice thing about having these compliance frameworks tell us what we need to achieve, but not how, is we can go different paths to achieving it. I'm in the Madison, Wisconsin area, and it's like me telling my neighbor that they need to go to St. Louis, which is about 6 hours away, but I don't tell them how. And they can plane, train, automobile, they can drive different routes, that sort of thing. The goal is just to get there, right? And so implementation guides have a very specific route that they want you to take. But there's this idea, and the term for it is compensating controls. And again, if we use the language, if we're talking to auditors and we use their language, it helps their understanding and it helps, well, we act like we're one of them, like we can convey ideas better. And so compensating controls, nice question to ask them. Are there any compensating controls we can use? Maybe you've got a network switch in an environment that just can't have MFA retrofitted onto it. And so what are the compensating controls for password entropy? Well, it turns out they usually have some. And so even though they might have an opinion about the best way to do it, there are other ways to do that. And so you get to that by reading the regulations. Another big area that we see this in is cipher suites. And you read the regulations. We get people that want to tweak TLS 1.2 cipher suites. And admittedly, there are some ciphers in the TLS 1.2 suite that are less than optimal at this point. There are better choices. But if you're in the middle of an audit and you're faced with a choice between tweaking, maybe the compliance scanner says that you've got to tweak these things, but it also says you haven't patched in 2 years. Well, how do you prioritize? Well, if you read the regulation, you'll know that the regulation for PCI 321 only says that you need to meet TLS 1.2. By using vSphere 6, 7, and 7, you do that automatically. And so you can actually prioritize then. You can go patch, and that's a better use of your time. You can come back later. I definitely recommend coming back later and doing the work to be more secure. But if you want the audit to go away, and what's the goal here? You want to be done with this thing. You want that audit to go away, and prioritize that sort of thing. One of the things that I like, a process that I like, OODA, the OODA loop. You may have heard of it. There was a colonel in the U.S. Air Force that developed this. Observe, orient, decide, and act. And observing, again, let's ignore the past. Whatever is, I kind of hate the saying it is what it is, but in this case, it is what it is. Observe, scan, survey the situation, get a nice asset inventory, scan everything. Orient yourself, assess. I often also joke that Microsoft Excel is probably the most popular InfoSec tool there is. Take all of the findings and put them in a column. The next column over, is this a false positive or not? That sort of thing. And then the third column over, assess it in terms of the compliance framework. Should we fix it? Should we fix it now versus later? Do we need it to pass the compliance audit, or is it an implementation guide's opinion? That sort of thing. And that's a really important distinction. Then you can prioritize. You can decide, decide what to work on, that sort of thing. And then you can fix stuff. You act, you fix stuff. And then you can scan again. And I actually recommend I didn't put it in here. I probably should have recommended, put it in here officially, but getting access to the scanners, the compliance scanners yourself, so that you can run it against your own environments. That's a really powerful thing. You can see what you're up against. You can see what the options are. A lot of those scanners can have their settings tweaked so that they're strict PCI compliance, PCI stuff versus best practices, that sort of thing. And that's really nice. In the past, I have gotten some flack from people who operated scanners. Well, why would you need access to a scanner? Well, and I say, well, I'd like to do this stuff myself. I'd like to not bug you. Well, I had somebody tell me that then I'd learn all the vulnerabilities in the environment. I'm like, I have root in the environment too. They're like, oh, that's a good point. Let me add an account. That worked out really well, by the way. Again, just talking. The fix for a lot of this stuff is not adversarial. It's talking. It's kill them with kindness sort of thing. Fix for a lot of compliance issues, though, is just shutting SSH off. Honestly, number 5, biggest thing. If you take nothing away from this, I urge you to shut SSH off, because compliance scanners, vulnerability scanners, think ESXi, anything, they think anything with SSH is a Linux box, right? AIX box, it's a Linux box. Windows box running SSH for some reason, it's a Linux box. ESXi, it's a Linux box, right? And it's not. It's not a multi-user operating system. It's not meant to be. It's a purpose-built operating system for virtualization. And anybody who logs in as root or as any other user in via SSH or the ESXi shell is root. There's really no permission model there, and that's by design, because it is not a multi-user operating system. These are troubleshooting interfaces. They're support interfaces. The product is delivered with SSH off, SSH disabled, SSH firewall off. And you've got to turn it on. You've got to tweak a bunch of stuff to turn it back on. And what you get with that is a bunch of attack surface. And I can understand vSphere 6 and 6.5, 6.0, 6.5, even a little 6.7. 6.7 only had like 60% API coverage, something like that. vSphere 7 now, especially, has got way more API coverage, 98%, 99% API coverage. You can do everything through the APIs through vCenter Server. And that's important, because vCenter Server's got a role-based access control model. It's got all that stuff. And so Drive, it's got better auditing. It's got all that stuff. Drive all your management stuff there and save SSH. Save the shell. Turn on lockdown mode. Shut that stuff off. It's less attack surface. Like I said, ransomware is scary. Earlier talks of mine last year, I often likened it to my toaster. ESXi is a toaster. SSH is the maintenance hatch on the bottom, the cleaning hatch. You can see it probably needs cleaning here, but I think I did actually shake it out after this. But can you operate a toaster through the maintenance hatch? Absolutely. Is it a good idea? Well, it depends on your goals in life. You know, if your goal is to meet the fire department, hey, game on. You know, you're in good shape there. But you know, should you? Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And so just because you can cram bread through the hole in the bottom of the toaster doesn't mean you shouldn't use the normal interfaces up top. You know, close the maintenance hatches down, only use them when you need them, turn them off again, close them up again when you're done. I've had a lot of customers, they look at me, they think it's a trick that I'm telling them this, and it's not. And I've had a lot of happy folks, you know, they shut it off. A bunch of people have just automated it. Some people that need to do troubleshooting dumps, support dumps of VMs and things like that, just script it. PowerCLI can turn on that service on a particular ESXi host. You can go in, do your thing, and then you can script shutting it off again. It's really easy. Don't dismiss the warning messages. When it says SSH is enabled in vCenter Server, it's easy to click that dismiss button. I want to get rid of that dismiss button. Don't dismiss it. Leave the breadcrumb there to warn you. Like I said, ransomware, this is attack surface you don't need when you're faced with ransomware. So those are my 5. I've got some honorable mentions here. 1, evaluate the environment as it is. We've seen a number of customers where the auditors have come in and asked for SSH to be turned on the ESXi host. Again, don't need it. And those customers, in fact, several of the customers didn't have SSH on. And they reached out to us. Why would these auditors need that? Well, in one case, it was after the fact. The auditors had enabled SSH. They turned the auditors logged in as root, compared it to Linux, found that it's not Linux. All these findings, and then we're actually attempting to develop a contract for remediating all of that stuff. And the fix was just shut SSH off again. You know, opinion. So yeah, evaluate your environment as it is. Again, don't worry about the history of it. You want to show improvement too. That's the other thing. The whole point of this audit is to pass, but if you can get some improvement out of it, that's cool as well. Opinion or requirement, we talked about that at length. Definitely, and this is, you know, looking at election cycles and that opinion versus requirement is a whole other thing. Opinion versus fact. But, you know, go back to the compliance, the reference documentation for the compliance framework, the regulatory guidelines themselves, if there's a question. Don't get hooked on tools. Again, tools are just fancy implementation guides, And if you do use a tool, there are places for tools. Tools are great. They are a good starting point for working through a bunch of things and for security scanning and things, but they're not always right. You need a human to go back through it and to verify things. And then this is going to sound manipulative, and it is, but you can leverage an audit for change, actually. You know, if there's something that's been bugging you or you want a tool, you know, that new Carbon Black workload tool that's coming out that was announced at VMworld, and there's a trial of it, and a 6-month free trial that'll start in November here, actually. I wish that was around when I was a customer, because it helps find and remediate vulnerabilities in all the workloads as well. That's something that gets foisted on vSphere admins, and that, you know, us vSphere admins don't really want, right? And so you want a tool, you want a process change. This is a good time to do it. You get it into that guidance, because that guidance, the findings from an audit are going to go to the CISO, the CIO, and it's going to get attention. So it's a great place to do some work there if you think that there's some changes to be made. And yeah, so a recap. Understand why you're doing this, why you're stuck doing it, why it's not going to go away. You can choose to be happy about it. You don't have to be happy about it, but you can choose to fight it or not, you know. Don't assign blame. Just work on fixing stuff. Only vSphere admins understand vSphere, and so you're going to have to explain it. Big difference between a compliance framework and an implementation guide. You know, huge difference. One's an opinion on how to do something. One doesn't even tell you how to do it, just what you need to do. Read them yourself. Shut SSH off, and evaluate and prioritize. Prioritization is probably the biggest thing in that bullet point, is just prioritizing your work, because don't go down rabbit holes when you got bigger fish to fry. Not to have too many cliches in one sentence, but you know, again, if you haven't patched in a while versus messing with TLS ciphers, as my example, patching will get you farther faster, that sort of thing. If there's any questions, put them out in the live chat. I don't see any. People have been coming and going. I appreciate folks stopping by. If you're watching this recording, I appreciate it as well. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes here. If there's any questions or comments or thoughts, or you think I'm crazy, I'll just answer that. I am kind of crazy, sure. But next week we're going to talk about keeping attackers out of vSphere. We'll talk about some identity management. We'll talk about some permission models. We'll talk about a variety of things. And so, like I said, thank you very much. I appreciate the support. I appreciate you being our customers, and I hope you're being as safe and sane as you'd like in this crazy 2020 we have here. And like I said, I'll stick around for a minute and see if there's anything going on. Thank you as well, out in the chat. Salim, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, John. Hey, if you here, let's go back to my fancy thing here. Oh, I don't know if I can get my thing up. I'm Plankers, at Plankers on Twitter. And yeah, here we go. I've got a fancy ATEM Mini. Here, I can do my Luma key. Oops. Maybe I can't. There we go. That's my Twitter handle. If you need anything, reach out, and we'll get it figured out. Thank you very much, and take care.